is coming to us from the University of Cumberland in Williamsburg, Kentucky, and that's Keely Hagan. Keely is a history and political science major. She also has an associate's degree in paralegal studies and intends to continue her education in master's in business administration and hopes to go on to law school. So that's a great combination. She also mentions that yes, she goes to school in Kentucky, but at her heart she's a Colorado girl. And so she's probably looking forward to the snow that we're probably going to get here.
I'll be back in Kentucky by then.
All right, so we will start with Keely then. And speaking about my university, the University of Virginia, and she tells us about Thomas Jefferson's program.
All right. Sorry. Hi everybody, hope everyone had a great lunch. Today I'll be talking about Greco-Roman classicism and how that influenced Thomas Jefferson's educational philosophies to make him open the University of Virginia. As an introduction, I'd like to say that Jefferson and all of his contemporaries possessed such a great urgency to find a proper American education system. This comes from the idea that they wanted to move away from any European influence. He promoted Republican and classical education to ensure citizens could self-govern themselves and that the American Republic would be able to prosper with its citizenry. Classical texts also shaped his own intellectual precepts, that his extensive library also helped him foster his own virtuous citizenship. His library included classical texts like Cicero, Plato, Livy, Sallust, and Tacitus. All of these emphasized reason and civic responsibility at their roots. To define the Republican ideals that we're going to be talking about in his ideas, we're going to talk about Plato's The Republic. He bases the Republican values off of 4 cardinal values, which are wisdom, courage, moderation, justice. Wisdom is where education will fall under, and also that's intellectual, anything under that cardinal value. Jefferson also resonates with the ideas in the Republic that each person is responsible for upholding their role in the Republic. Leaders should be motivated by reason rather than ambition. That ambition is not like the way that we are ambitious. It's actually the way that ambition of wrongful things. They shouldn't be personally moving forward for their own personal gain. And that also virtue must prosper for a republic to also prosper. On top of that, that tyranny in the republic isn't intolerable. Plato and Jefferson also believed that the republic depended on the morality and the people's education. That would be their education must be moral and move forward their prosperity. He was a big writer of letters, so a lot of this is from his letters that I found. In a letter to John Adams on October 12, 1813, he criticizes the European education and promoted education for broader access to its citizenry. He criticizes it for its exclusivity and flawed priorities. He also said that European students are burdened with abstract theories and neglect the majority of the common citizens. In Europe at the time, only the elites get the education. That's why a lot of our founding fathers, their education is in Europe because they had just come over into America, and all of them get their education because they're pretty much wealthy people coming from Europe. He continues that essential practical knowledge fosters students to think independently, and this would lead to informed citizens that are capable of self-sustaining. In his second letter to John Bannister Jr., on October 15, 1785, he says that he deems England as a tyrannical aristocracy more likely to give ill than good ideas to an American. This shows his intellectual shift for a need for an exclusive American education system that is reflected in classical Republican beliefs. He continues that sending Americans to Europe for their education after we have established ourselves leads students to a fond of European aristocratic luxuries, and that this could cultivate complacency in our younger youths that are going to be educated in America. In his letter to John Brazier on August 24th, 1819, he just is talking about how awesome Greek and Latin are for people. He says that they are examples of refined taste and style, and that it has a clear, rational writing style that distinguished nations are familiar with, so he hopes that America can follow into that exclusivity and be another distinguished nation. He also says that reading classical texts in the original language is a luxury and a comfort that fills boredom. I know that probably a lot of history majors would also want to learn Latin, because that's personally something I would love to do, because it can help with law, history, anything to do with the government. A lot of our words come from bases of Latin. And then in his final letter I want to discuss, to John Adams on December 10th, 1819, he uses Roman figures and authors to expand his ideas of civic virtue. Jefferson regards Cicero as a paragon of civic virtue and a guide for Republican law and governance. Cicero and Jefferson, honestly, Jefferson loves Cicero and he talks about him a lot. One of the major things that I found that actually shocked me is that Cicero and other classical writers believed that the pursuit of happiness wasn't like haha laughing like us, but rather it was equating the pursuit of virtue. This is also shown in our Declaration of Independence, where Jefferson could have said life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, like John Locke, but instead he says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because he wants a virtuous citizenry in his nation. This also connects to Aristotle, his idea of eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is the idea of human flourishment and living a virtuous life, just another classical writer. He also, in this letter to John Adams, says that Cicero's letters certainly breathe the purest effusions of an exalted patriot, while the parasite Caesar is left in odious contrast. He condemns Caesar for him being a tyrant. I think most of us in this room probably know that Caesar was a tyrant. But Jefferson believes that Caesar could have used his power, and I quote, to lead his fellow citizens into good government. Tyrants are the opposite of virtuous republicanism, and Jefferson continuously condemns tyranny. If any of you guys have gone to his memorial here, he literally, the biggest quote is saying that he has condemned tyranny in America. Jefferson illustrates his intolerance for tyranny in his letter to William Stephen Smith, November 13th, 1787. He justifies the right to revolution and his opposition to tyranny by saying, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." And then also in his declaration, he says, if a government becomes tyrannical, it is the right and duty of the people to abolish it. This reflects his opposition to tyranny, and he goes on in his educational philosophy to talk about how educated citizens can oppose tyranny. In his first bill, a bill for more general diffusion of knowledge in 1779, he says that an educational and classical studies gave Americans the tools to recognize and combat tyranny, and he also recounts how, and I quote, some of the best governments have perverted to tyranny. This means that people, the more educated they are, more likely to be able to say, oh, this is tyrannical, we need to abolish this government. He proposed curriculums, the length of attendance, the possibility of scholarship for students, and yet it was a great bill, in my opinion, it didn't pass. So he would continue fighting on until he opened UVA. To build UVA, he had a lot of personal opinions on how universities should look, and if you ever want a good laugh, go and read the source, The Trustees of the Lottery for East Tennessee College. He says that the ideal college should be an academic village rather than just one big giant building where students go to study. He exactly says, large crowded buildings in which youths are pent up are equally unfriendly to health, to study, to manners, to morals. He writes this in 1816, and this is as he starts to really look at maybe Virginia can have a state college. Jefferson's vision for Virginia State College would be in Charlottesville, and he has visitors come with him to where he would build the university. These visitors included some pretty prominent figures of history: James Monroe, James Madison, Joseph Cabell, John Hart Wilcock, and David Watson. In his vision for building the college, he drafts the bill for establishing a system of education in 1817. This mirrors his bill in 1779, but Joseph Cabell, one of his visitors, becomes incredibly important in Jefferson's founding of the university. Joseph Cabell takes his bill and makes it more modest, and he warns Jefferson this may not pass. You were a polarizing figure in our history, obviously, and he says we have to remove certain things of this bill so that we can get this to hopefully pass. Jefferson also sends a letter to the Virginia House of Delegates with all the visitors' signatures to try to convince them, and it wouldn't originally pass, which is very interesting because we still have the university. An education bill landed in Cabell's committee that wasn't exactly Jefferson's, unfortunately. It did not have the state location listed yet, and also the budget was only $15,000, which today is approximately $372,831. I really don't think we could build a university today with that amount of funding. The Virginia General Assembly's Act appropriating part of literary fund revenue for the creation of a board of commissioners for education and for the establishment of a university names it the University of Virginia. Unlike colleges such as, at the time, such as Yale, UVA would also be established on a secular charter. The reason that Jefferson and his contemporaries decided to do this was so that it reflected our Constitution and First Amendment, saying that freedom of religion should be important to all of us in all walks of life. Jefferson would be appointed rector by 1819 and by the Board of Visitors, and by 1821, most of the buildings from the university would already be built, and the final building that is left to be built would be Jefferson's Rotunda. This is the last way that he shows that he's influenced by Greek and Roman buildings, the precepts of Greek and Roman life, that he actually builds his rotunda after the Roman Pantheon, and that's also what his building here, his memorial here, is also built based off of Greek architecture. He further shows that influence because it's very important to him that his university is seen as prestigious, and his Pantheon, or his rotunda, would be used for public examinations, worship service, a library, and other purposes. It still stands today, and it's actually the symbol on most of the University of Virginia's symbolism. Anything like this is going to be his building. The reality of the University of Virginia is quite sad the first year, though. I didn't know this until I started researching, but there was actually riots the first year that the university opens. This includes that a student threw a bottle of urine through a professor's window, and as many of the students were masked, they were caught fist fighting and throwing bricks at the professors. The major issue with opening a university like UVA is that a lot of the students who were going there were actually plantation sons, like plantation owners' sons, so they were already pretty wealthy. But then when you get to this school, you're having to wear a uniform, same as the people who are poor. You're having to abide by their rules. You're having to do all of these things that they don't want to do, so they act out. In a letter to Joseph Coolidge on October 13th, 1825, he discusses his sadness, and Jefferson, until he dies, still says that that is the worst day of his life, even though he has lost, at this point, I want to say 4 of his children. He's lost 4 of his children and his wife, and he still says that this is the worst day because the university that he built was not reflecting what he valued. It's also impossible to not also address that the use of slave labor to build the university, and also his use of slave labor in his own life, would undermine his entire idea of inclusive republicanism. And you have to, I don't want to commit presentism, but we have to acknowledge the fact that he did use slaves to build the university, and he did own slaves in his personal life, and that is not exactly how republicanism is seen in today's eyes. In conclusion, I'd like to say that though the university was not without controversy, but that he integrated Greco-Roman classicism into his educational ideals, which was incredibly important for how the university would be founded and the curriculums that would be taught. So, thank you.